Alright, today we're going to be getting into the 13-21 tier list. I have a separate tier list for every role. Let's get into it. I'm not going to be talking about every champion on the list, mostly just the champion in Z and the top of S and Z counterpick. So we're going to start off with top lane. Start with Z tier. Garen. Garen did not receive any direct nerfs. Phase Rush got nerfed a little, but that shouldn't affect Garen at all. He can still go Conquer into some matchups. Phase Rush is still going to be fine. This champion is still a menace, even with that. And with the Phase Rush and the Hullbreaker nerfs, isn't going to change his power level all that much. Malphite. Malphite is still Malphite. Nothing's changed. He's going to remain as one of the best top laners, especially for lower elos. Illaoi. Illaoi has very few bad matchups. You don't have to have great macro knowledge. You can just push and push and push. It's just the way the champion functions. She's very strong. She doesn't require you to be very good. She's just powerful. Ornn. Ornn is blindable into almost anything. That's why he's up here. He provides a lot of utility. He scales really well as a tank. He provides his team with better scaling items. Rumble. Rumble has literally, I think, 0 bad matchups in top lane. Like, even into most range matchups, he will win them. There's very few matchups in which Rumble will struggle. He wins almost, I think, every single matchup levels 1 through 5. There isn't really a champion that can check him at that point. There are definitely some that, like, if he misplays, he can lose, but, like, most instances, Rumble's going to win, like, every matchup in top lane levels 1 through 5. Renekton. Renekton is still Renekton. He hasn't been hit. He's not even a Hullbreaker user either, so that's another bonus. Goredrinker, Shojin, Cleaver, Sterak's is still absurdly strong. He does so much damage. He's so tanky. He has lots of healing. He's just a great champion. Brand is supposed to be up here. So now let's go over the Z counter only. So Briar top has the potential to be very good, but you cannot blind her or you will just get fisted by like a Garen or an Illaoi or a Rumble or what. Or a Renekton. Briar succeeds into people who are going to blind range top, or champions who cannot punish her levels 1 through 3, because that is when she is at her weakest. Level 4 is when she kind of comes online in terms of power level. And if she can get through lane even till like her first base, where she gets Vamp Scepter, she's gonna be good. Varus. Varus top got buffs this patch to his W. Now W is Varus top's first max ability, and you don't start seeing the buff until later ranks, so it's just a little bit of a buff to Varus top, more utility, slow on its E. He's going to do well into the likes of tanks who can't really catch him. He does very well into Illaoi, he does very well into Garen. He can bully them very hard in the early lane phase. The Garen matchup gets a little harder once he completes Stridebreaker, but by that point you should have generated enough of a lead for yourself. He does well into Ornn. He does well into Nasus. He does really well into Nasus. Not good into Mundo because of Mundo's CC immunity. Udyr he beats really hard. He's going to struggle into Darius. But like he's just a very strong counterpick into a lot of these people, like blindable tanks. Sion he's very good into too, which is a very common blind pick tank. Yeah. So he's basically just like a super hard tank counter in the top lane, that if you have counterpick and you have the freedom to pick Varus, he can actually just turbo stomp, and you can 1v2 starting at like level 4 if you have have created enough of an HP advantage. Quinn. So Quinn top is kind of the same deal as Varus. She's a very niche counterpick, but when she has like a good spot within her team composition, she's good into the enemy team composition, and she has a good favorable lane matchup, she can be an absolute terror in the game. She doesn't really do all that well into any of the Z tier top laners, but she has her place. She can beat things like... Oh, excuse me, sorry. She can kite out a lot of tanks early stages. She doesn't really want to face into any of the bruisers, but she's very, very situational, but there is always a perfect scenario where Quinn can dominate a whole game by herself. Cassio. So Cassio is Z tier counterpick. Blinding Cassio can be a little risky because into things like Renekton, Garen, Emax, Nasus, she's going to find some struggling spots. But into most matchups, she is going to bully very hard early game. She scales well. She's decently tanky, especially with you go Rod of Ages, Rylai's, Seraphs, and then you can go Stoneplate. And she's a pseudo-tank who does a lot of damage with Conqueror. Gwen. Pretty self-explanatory. Gwen has never really been a blind pickable champion. She's the same thing. She is a champion that does very, very well into melee matchups. Typically, melee tanks who don't have a lot of threat early. If people are ever blinding Scion and your team is not AP heavy, you should be picking Gwen, because it is quite literally, there is no way to lose that matchup as Gwen. It is almost unfuck-upable. It is like almost impossible to make yourself lose that matchup as Gwen. Same with like the Ornn matchup. She does well into the Alawi matchup. She does well into champions like Udyr, Mundo, Shen, Tahm Kench. Like a lot of these like low to no mobility tank champions who aren't going to be bullying her in the early game, she will be able to play through the lane phase, scale up, and just take over the side lane in team fights. Vayne Top. Vayne Top functions the same as Quinn, except she's got some more broad uses because she can kite things like the Garen and the Renekton a little bit better. Not much to say there. Everyone knows Vayne Top is good into something, is good into like a lot of melee bruisers so that she can kite. Akshan. Akshan is kind of just better Quinn. There's instances where Quinn is going to be better than Akshan, but there's very few of them. Akshan is kind of just better Quinn. He's base tankier. He has more kiting potential. Or sorry, less. He has more like mobility with his E inside of the team fight. He's kind of just better Quinn in a lot of cases, and like probably I would say 80% of cases, he's kind of just better Quinn. Trundle. So Trundle suffers from the thing that Trundle has always suffered from, in that he has bad matchups in a lot of the meta instances. But there are quite a few champions in the Z tier and the top of the S tier that Trundle can do very well into and just absolutely demolish the side lane into. Brand top functions the same as Varus, except he has a few more conditions that need to be met. Braun top can, if you go first strike, you can make a lot, even after the nerfs, you can make a lot of gold off of melee champions. And you want the enemy team, regardless of what position, what lane you're picking Brand in, because Brand can kind of be picked in all 5 positions right now. You want the enemy team to have at least like 3 melee champions, or at least 2 melee champions and like a short range champion. So he's very situational. And then things like Nasus, Lee Sin. Mundo is still Mundo after the nerfs. Nasus has a lot of flexibility with Emax and Doran's Ring being so strong now. Lee Sin top received buffs on 13-19, and I feel like he's kind of slept on right now with going Shield Bash and Conqueror. He can kind of just stat check level 1, 2, and 3 almost every top laner in the game. So I think he's very slept on. You just need to go Shield Bash with Conqueror, and you can kind of just fist fight. You put 3 points in W, and then you just max 3 points in QWE, and then you max out W first, then Q, and then E last. And he kind of functions the same as Jungle Lee Sin. He's just going to hit his level break points faster, and he can actually bully a lot of top laners right now. Alright, let's move on to Jungle. So, with the Jungle changes, AD junglers have gotten a bit of a bump this patch with the changes to Jungle. So Z tier we have Graves, with AD scaling returning to the Jungle Pet. Graves is going to be bumped up from S to Z tier. Graves is very strong early game, he's got a strong mid game, he scales really, really hard. And he has a lot of different build paths where he can go super, like, assassin heavy, DPS heavy, he can go bruiser. He's pretty flexible, he can do lots of different things. Zac. Zac is the best pure tank jungler on the patch, has been for a while now. He's definitely slept on. Access to things like Sunfire, Demonic Embrace, and Abyssal Mask allow him to do a crazy amount of damage because his bases are really high. Amplifying all of that with items that amplify his already incredible strengths. He's the best pure tank jungler on the patch. It is no contest. Morgana Jungle. So Morgana Jungle was already decent last patch. It was already popping up all over. And they buffed it again. They increased the base damage per tick on her pool and upped the monster damage modifier on her W. Again. So Morgana Jungle is definitely, I think, going to be one of the strongest picks on the patch. Her clear speed is crazy. She has some pretty flexible build paths. She does a lot of damage. She provides a lot of utility. Alright, Jarvan. Jarvan is the best AD bruiser on the patch. Still is. He didn't get hit. He's still going to do all the things Jarvan does. Fiddlesticks. So Fiddlesticks is only in Z tier for like lower elos, because a lot of people struggle to play around vision in the lower elo brackets of the game, and Fiddle abuses that really, really, really well. Like, he can win an entire game by himself off of like one good ultimate where the enemy team didn't play around vision properly. Nocturne. So Nocturne is a champion that, despite having a very low presence in the early stages of the game, is, I think, super powerful. His level 6 power spike is super good. If you're using his ultimate correctly, your first ultimate should almost always be a kill into an objective conversion, whether that be Dragon or Herald. He's an incredibly strong duelist. You can go for invades if you have winning lanes with lethal tempo. You are probably one of the strongest like level 3, level 4 duelists in the game in terms of jungle. Actually, not even in terms of jungle, just in terms of like melee v melee dueling. Nocturne is kind of him. Evelynn. Evelynn is still Evelynn. Nothing's changed about her. She's a super obnoxious champion that forfeits early game power for insane mid game and late game pressure. She does an astronomical amount of damage with like 0 skill expression required. She can carry games by herself with her pick potential. Rammus. Rammus is in S tier, but that's kind of like a confidant. Of like, he requires the enemy team to draft a certain way for him to be very powerful. He did receive nerfs this patch, but in the right conditions, he will still be Rammus. He will still be the OK Armadillo fucking slaughterer with Thornmail. Alright, Z counter only. So Brand Jungle got buffs this patch. His clear speed is crazy. The thing is you can't pick Brand into things like the Graves or the Jarvan, because he will get invaded early, because his cooldowns are on the longer side, and you will die, and you will get chain invaded, and you will be very upset, and you'll be like, why did you tell me to play this pick? I'm telling you to play it when you see the enemy jungler, you see the enemy laners, you can recognize that you're not going to get invaded, the enemy team has a lot of melee champions, and Brand is going to be an insane champion, and you're not going to get punished in the early game. Ivern functions the same way. He doesn't want to get invaded, but his team fighting, although very different from Brand, is still kind of Exodia-inducing. He doesn't provide a lot of damage, but the utility he provides with Brushmaker on hit damage, the Daisy's tankiness and utility, the shielding is astronomical, especially with Shirelia's. Support items are so good. In the right conditions, Ivern can be so oppressive. Karthus and Talia, again, same thing. These AP mage junglers all want the same things. They want to be in games where they're not going to get invaded, and they're going to have time to get some levels and a little bit of items under their belt, and then they're going to become really good. Talia is a little different than Karthus and Brand, because Talia is a counter to a certain style. She's very good so if you have winning lanes and you're against a Jarvan, you can kind of get away with a Talia pick. Things like Jarvan, Rakan, Zac, these engaged champions, Talia punishes them really hard by making them take a lot of damage before they even touch your team. And that's why Talia has a lot of flex potential in a lot of different roles and does a lot of damage, and if you play for your team, she can definitely, in the right case, be very, very, very strong. Let's go to mid lane. So mid lane, there are 4 Z tier champions. We have Vex, Naafiri, Orianna, and Lux. So Vex does so much damage. She has incredible snowball potential. She has resets. She has very long range. She's a safe laner. And all around, she's just a great champion right now. There's not much else to say. She doesn't need to be like a counter pick. She can be blinded into a lot of matchups. The only thing she'll struggle into like Syndra a little bit. But everything else she feels pretty safe blinding into. She will just exist, and her team fighting is very good, and if she gets any sort of lead, she can stranglehold a game with her resets and her just raw damage output. Naafiri. So, Naafiri is very different from the other assassins. That's why, as you'll notice, Naafiri is like the only AD assassin in like the entirety of ZNS tier. She's like actually I think the only assassin unless you count Ahri or Fizz. Naafiri's lane phase was hurt a long time ago, and she was moved towards a lot of scaling power. With the game being slowed down last patch, she was benefited from that. And with First Strike, I was kind of skeptical about putting her into Z tier, maybe moving her down to S, because now most mid laners are going to be going for Aerie plus Scorch, which is a lot of poke for a melee champion like Naafiri to handle. But I really think you can bypass a lot of that with this champion, and if you can hit 2 to 3 items with like Eclipse, Cleaver, Shojin, this champion is an absolute monster in team fights. With Eclipse, Cleaver, Shojin, she has so much tankiness, her cooldowns, she's got so much repeatability, her burst damage is high, her DPS is high. You can go First Strike to kind of try and circumvent that by getting a little bit more income, although I would just recommend Electrocute or Comet, actually, in a lot of cases. In case you didn't know, Comet is super broken on Naafiri, because every tick of her bleed and every attack of her dogs reduces the cooldown of Comet to the point where late game, with I think 3+ dogs, Comet can trigger twice on the bleed of 1 Q, and it's so powerful on the champion. Orianna. This champion feels very self-explanatory. She's a lane bully, she's a strong mid-game, she scales super well, she's got incredible zone control, she's got great utility. She's just the whole package as a mage right now. Her range is a little low compared to some other mages in the mid to late game, but she makes up with it with her ability to just have a zone completely controlled and being kind of nowhere near it. Lux. So the only reason, I don't think Lux is broken, I don't think she's, like, gonna turbo stomp anything. The reason Lux is in Z tier is because you can literally play the game mid lane and not interact, especially when you hit level 6 with Lost Chapter and Doran's Ring. You can literally just, like, E-ulti the wave on cooldown, and you should almost always have lane prio on this champion. You can constantly look for roams, scout for the enemy jungler, get down vision control. This champion does not have to interact, and she scales very well. Her pick potential is crazy high in the mid game. She does not have to interact. If you are a player who finds they are losing lane a lot, Lux is the pick for you. She does not need to interact with her lane opponent past like level 5. She is so good at just not interacting, scaling, and playing for picks. Syndra, Asol, Lissandra are my top 3 for S tier right now. Syndra is still very, very strong. She does a lot of damage. Her lane phase is super strong. She doesn't lose to a lot of things. And she just does a crazy amount of damage, scales super well. She's kind of Orianna with less zone control, with less focus on zone control and more focus on damage, if I had to like sum that up. So Aurelion Sol did get nerfed this patch, sadly. I still think he's a very good counter pick, not quite enough to be put in the Z counter only tab, but in a lot of cases, if you can scale up, despite them nerfing his scaling a little bit, this champion is still going to be strong. Lissandra. Lissandra is a mid lane champion for like you people who are auto-filled or are learning mid lane, or just don't want to think. This champion is like the Malphite of mid lane. You will always have value because of the utility your champion brings. So, Z. Counter only. Pantheon. Pantheon is one of the strongest situational counter picks in mid lane. If the enemy team is blinding a melee mid lane champion that isn't named Zed, Pantheon beats them in lane. Right? Sylas. Pantheon stomps him early. Tryndamere. Pantheon wins early. Fizz. Pantheon stomps early. Irelia. Pantheon wins early. Talon. Pantheon stomps early. Yone. Pantheon wins early. Echo. If the enemy mid laner picks a melee champion that isn't named like Zed or Akali, Pantheon's going to win that matchup, and just by existing. So, Kassadin. As you'll notice, there's a lot of mages in the higher tiers of mid lane right now. Kassadin is perennially known as that anti-mage champion who loves to scale. The game has been slowed down, more time is given to scale, mages are more common. Kassadin, given the right circumstances, you can take over a game if you can just get your farming down in the early game into a pick that's not going to oppress you too hard. D-Shield, Second Wind, and Fleet allows you to be super tanky in the lane phase. You have so much sustain. You have D-Shield, Second Wind, Fleet. You have so much sustain, so much healing. You're good at resisting magic damage already. You can take double MR stat shards if you feel like you need to. He's very, very strong. Malphite. So Malphite mid has a couple of different use cases. It's mostly into AD mid laners, like Tryndamere, Yasuo, and Yone. Those are the three. Qiyana's also a decent thing too. But these Malphite mid is just a counter pick to some of these AD mid laners in which you just want to completely neutralize them and make them have a bad day. Talia. Talia mid functions the same way as Talia jungle. She is a counter pick to certain team compositions, and she can only really exist against certain laners. Like, she's going to get bullied super hard by Orianna and Lux and Syndra. But there are champions in which she's going to be able to just go even in lane, scale up, and deny hard engage. Brand mid. Brand mid is the same thing. He kind of wants... There's only a handful of matchups in which Brand can kind of exist. He can do alright into Vex. He's alright into Ori. He's very good into Asol. He's good into Xerath. He struggles with champions that can push tempo trade on him, like Sylas and Fizz. These champions are going to be a little bit of a struggle for him. But into a lot of other mages, he's a great lane neutralizer who scales into a monstrous team fighter. Same thing with Anivia. She follows kind of the same rule as Brand. Rumble mid. It's the same thing as Pantheon. He is a melee champion checker who's just AP instead of AD. He's kind of just the AP version of Pantheon when in the mid lane. Veigar. Veigar is a champion who scales astronomically hard. He's pretty long range with the buffs they gave him a while ago. The main thing is that Ahri is super popular in solo queue right now, and Veigar cucks Ahri so unbelievably hard. Because when Ahri engages with R, Veigar throws down his cage, and she's left there with 2 charges on her R, looking like a fucking idiot standing in the baby cage, and if she doesn't have Hourglass, she's probably just gonna die, right? She's also good into Aurelion Sol, or Veigar is also good into Aurelion Sol. He's alright into Naafiri. He can exist against things like Fizz with Crown Rush. He's good into things like Sion mid, Tryndamere mid, where he's just going to farm off of, be able to farm and kind of equalize if he just stays safe. Nasus. So Nasus is a counter pick. This is kind of something that's not super widespread. I do it a lot. He can poke out almost every mage in the game except for Orianna. He's good into a lot of melee mid laners. He's really good into Zed. He's good into not Qiyana, because Qiyana has a lot of early damage. Or Diana is also going to be a little rough, but a lot of the AD mids like Naafiri, Zed, Talon, Nasus with Emax is just going to poke them out of lane, get some plates, get some free stacks. It's pretty chill. Alright, we're going to move on to AD carry now. This is the smallest list. So, Z tier, Ziggs, Swain, and Ashe. So, Ziggs is kind of an outlier. He just does so much damage. He has so much range, provides zone control, and he's a good AP flex if your team is AD heavy. So, Swain and Ashe are a little different. Ashe is an AD. You notice she is the only AD champion in Z tier with the nerfs to Jinx and Lethality Caitlyn this patch. Ashe does great damage. She scales well. The highest utility of any AD carry in the game. The map hacks she has is crazy. Her stun, her kiting. She is a very strong utility champion who also has the capability to do lots of damage. Swain is a great lane neutralizer, and he can kind of just scale. And the thing is, Swain spikes way harder off of 2 items than most AD carries do, and his items are a little cheaper, so he's going to reach that spike first. So it's about fighting when you're strong. Swain with Lucidity Boots, Leandries, and Rylai's is an absolute mid-game terror. Especially if you can get a stopwatch in there before you complete your Zhonya. You're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the mid-game. So, S tier. A lot of people are going to disagree that I have Caitlyn still in S tier. Lethality Caitlyn is not dead, as many people would say. You just have to swap from Sorcery Secondary to Eyeball Collection with Ultimate Hunter, and that'll fix the cooldown problem in your ultimate. And the AD ratio, you swap out Axiomark for Stormrazor to give you more crit scaling onto your ultimate. That fixes the problem. That's the way Lethality Caitlyn is going to be played now. You still go Youmuu's Collector, LDR, but then instead of Axiom, you just go Stormrazor into BT, and then you could sell Zerkers for RFC and have 100% crit with a fucking Youmuu's. So, and Crit Caitlyn is massively buffed. Collector Rush into Infinity Edgelord Doms is so much damage, and then you go RFC BT, you scale really well, you're a lane bully, you can acquire early leads by yourself with your support. Jinx. Jinx is still the same champion she was last patch. She just has a little less crazy fucking go nuts potential because they capped her passive stacks at 5. She's still good. Vayne. Vayne loves when games go to 3+ items, which is the trend Riot has set with the last patch. She's strong mid-game. Her lane phase is pretty abysmal in a lot of cases, but she can have cases where she goes even or even wins lane, and then scales into a mid-game, late-game monster. Jhin, specifically lethality Jhin, is what I'm talking about here in S tier, with like Muramana, Youmuu's and Collector, like Axiom Arc, that stuff. He has a lot of poke damage with W maxed. His ultimate does so much damage with Armor Pen because they increase the bases on it. He's a strong utility pick who's also a lane neutralizer. Karthus is kind of just like Ziggs as an AP bot laner if you want to perma-fight like a fucking madman, essentially, and he scales really well. Ezreal, if this tier list were focused on high elo, Ezreal would be in Z tier, but Ezreal is going to sit in the middle of S tier here because he's very, very skill shot dependent, and if you mess up a couple times in a team fight, you're going to do absolutely zero damage. Twitch, kind of for the same reason as Ezreal. Like, if Twitch makes like one positioning mistake when he opens, he's just going to get turned on and exploded out of the game. Xayah, again, people are going to disagree with me putting her this high, but I think she does a lot of damage, she scales well, her lane phase isn't bad, and she has a lot of self-peel with her ultimate and her E. Miss Fortune. Miss Fortune, I think, is the king AD carry for low elo right now. She, aside from Ashe, she does a lot of damage, her lane phase is really strong, her team fighting is great, she has the build diversity, whether you're going first strike lethality, or whether you're going PTA lethality, you can go PTA crit. Draven. Draven is something that, like, once you put the time on him, he's arguably Z tier. His early fighting is so good, with lethal tempo, he scales well, Trinity Force makes him tanky, does a lot of burst. Alright, let's get into the counter picks now. So, Brand AD carry, same functionality as Brand mid. You want something that's not going to be able to put you behind in lane, so if you're laning into Kai'Sa Nautilus or Pyke Nautilus, you're going to get fisted. Don't blame me for that. Brand's team fighting is what makes him such a good champion. Right? If you can scale and team fight, this champion is an absolute fucking menace to society. Right? Alright, Samira and Nyla are kind of similar champions in the sense that they want an engaged support, and they want team comps that are deathballing into them. They kind of exist as like a personal preference. Their playstyle is pretty similar. They both want to go in, get a massive AoE ultimate. They both scale astronomically well. Their mid game is really good. Their lane phases are both not bad. These champions are kind of just personal preference. They function with the same playstyle, like the same like philosophy of how they want to play the game. But it's just personal preference, honestly. Cassio. Cassio is one of those bot laners that plays like a marksman in the sense of like orb walking with her E, super high AP DPS. She's just like the AP version of an AD carry, essentially. And she's going to be a lot tankier. Her lane phase, if paired with the right things, can be very good. Cassio Nami, Cassio, and any engaged support can be super obnoxious to play against. Veigar. So I have found Veigar is a very good answer into the likes of Swain and Karthus. It allows you to neutralize them, and you outscale both of them. Alright, let's go on to the last position. We have support. So as you'll notice, there is the very few champions in Z and S tier for support right now. So start off with S. So Zyra, with the nerfs she received to support Zyra this patch, is shakily in S tier. Let's put her down here for clarity purposes. She is shakily in S tier. A good Zyra player can make her S tier. The average Zyra player, don't fucking play her. Don't touch her. Don't. Z tier. So Rakan and Blitzcrank are my Z tier picks for this patch. They don't really have like obnoxiously bad matchups. They're always going to provide value. Blitzcrank's hook. Blitzcrank can be 0 and 87 and still hit one hook and win the game off of it, right? He's a tempo champion. He punishes bad vision, which is good in low elo. We've established this when we talked about Fiddlesticks. Rakan is, honestly, I think one of the most broken champions in the game. Rakan with unflinching Legend Tenacity and Merc Treads with like Guardian, you can pick him. Like, he can be out of position. If a teammate is anywhere remotely near him, he will escape. He is so unpunishable. He's got good disengage, good engage, good all-in. Like, the only thing Rakan lacks as a support is poke. And he can even be super tanky by going Radiant Virtue Rush into Zhonya's. And he can engage super hard with Glacial Augment or Guardian, and he's so flexible, he's so hard to punish being out of position, he's super obnoxious. Seraphine buffs put her in S tier. I think she is situational. She can do a lot of damage now with her base buffs. She can be super obnoxious when paired with like a Caitlyn. I think farming Seraphine is kind of dead. It's still going to be okay, but I think support Seraphine as a counter pick to some things is good. Alright, Z counter only. Let's talk about this champion, Senna, right here, okay? If you are a support player, stop blind picking Senna, okay? I know every fucking YouTube channel that like talks about support is like, oh my god, Senna's fucking giga broken OP. Don't fucking blind pick this champion. Don't do it. It's so shit. Because if you aren't good enough to like have perma forward pressure while also dodging all the engaged supports fucking engage, you're gonna lose the lane, the enemy AD carry is gonna snowball, and then you're gonna fucking roam and your AD carry is gonna sit and get frozen off of fucking 12 waves. Don't blind pick this champion. Christ all fucking mighty. The melee champions that you should be playing fucking Senna into, like melee supports, is like fucking Alistar and like Braum. Poppy, maybe. Tahm Kench is also okay. Lux. So Lux support is, again, the only reason you should be blinding Lux is if you already have a Caitlyn and you see their AD carry is short range. If you see their AD carry is something short range, like a Kai'Sa or a Xayah or whatever, blinding Lux into the enemy support is okay if you see it's one of those few short range AD champions and you have a Caitlyn. That's it. Don't blind pick this champion otherwise. Taric. Taric is a champion who is going to be very good into team comps that want to hard engage and just beat you to death. His ultimate's super good, his sustain's very good. He just doesn't do a lot in lane. Soraka. Soraka is kind of the same fucking thing as Senna. Don't fucking blind pick this champion. Don't. She's even better. She's better than being blinded than Senna because she has her silence to kind of stuff engages. But like, I still don't blind pick this champion. Because if you get like into a fucking like Blitzcrank or like a Thresh or a Pyke and they hit their shit on you, you're gonna get one shot and then your AD carry is not gonna be able to play the game and then you're gonna lose because AD carry is the most important role in the game. Braum. So Braum is less about the other support and more about the enemy team composition. He excels in front to back versus front to back comps. So if both teams are front to back compositions, Braum is going to be super good because he gets that massive damage reduction. 55% for like 4 seconds at the beginning of a fight is going to be enough to swing the team fight in your favor most of the time. So NASA support. Let's talk about this. I'm not saying NASA support is good. It is hyper situational, and there's 2 champions in which it's going to fucking cripple them. And both of those champions are C tier. Zeri and Kalista. NASA support cripples both of those champions. But you should not be picking NASA support unless the enemy team has already drafted Zeri or Kalista. Okay? Milio. Milio is, again, a champion that, like, into engaged supports can struggle. He's a little better. He has his Q, he has the healing, he has the shielding and the peel. Milio pairs very well with Jinx and Caitlyn. Those are his 2 big ones. He's okay with Lucian, but Jinx and Caitlyn are his big 2, and they're both good this patch, which means we might see a rise in Milio. Poppy. Poppy is designed as a counterpick to people who play Rakan and Jarvan all the time. You press W, you pair like Poppy. If you have like a Poppy support with like a fucking Talia mid lane, Jarvan Rakan comps aren't going to be able to play the game. That's just the way. That's just what it is. Heimerdinger. Don't blind pick this champion either. Don't do it. Don't. Heimer support is a lane bully. Lane bullies have become less important. However, if the enemy team has drafted for early game, bullying their bot lane is a great way to stuff their comp and allow your team comp to just outscale theirs. And then Thresh, Nautilus, Pyke, they're always going to have good value, especially if you're good at them. They can always snowball really hard. They can make picks. Thresh and Nautilus are both tanky frontliners, especially if they go after Shock. Glacial Augment provides a lot of utility. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you for watching. If you watched all the way to the end, drop a like and a subscribe. I would appreciate that very much, and I will see you guys next time.